The Mentor Monday question this week was Pilates, or any kind of abdominal work actually. Should we teach Imprint? Should we allow students to imprint? What is Imprint? We need to identify first of all, what is Imprint? Lots and lots of people when doing abdominal work or core work, sorry, it's not abdominal work, it's core work, they push their low backs into the floor so that they have their abdominal muscles firing. This is not core work. Core work is where you use your cylinder of strength, which includes your back muscles. So everything is isometrically contracted in a neutral position. Neutral position is where the pubic bone, the hip bones, and the bottom ribs are level with each other. So Imprint, or pushing the low back into the floor, is where the pubic bone is higher than the ribs. The low back is pushed into the floor. This is a very old-fashioned way of teaching abdominal exercises, and really in terms of functionality it isn't serving us very, very well. But let's go back to that word, Imprint. When Joseph Pilates was teaching, I believe he pushed the low back into the floor, but as I said, we have changed that because functionally it isn't fantastic for us. Why is it not fantastic for us? Because functionally, we're in that position all the time. So functionally, we're already doing this. And we really need to be able to do the neutral part, the middle part, and the extension part in our lumbar spine. We need to be able to move our spine in every direction that it's supposed to be moving in with control. Then Stott Pilates utilized a term called imprint. Imprint, in Stott terms, was never push the low back into the floor. Imprint in Stott terms was this. I hope you can see it. If someone is in your class and you're teaching core work, and their abdominal muscles, which contribute, are not the sole engagement here, but contribute to core stability. If the abdominal muscles are weak and you want to challenge the core, normally someone, as they lift the second leg, will do something like this. I'm going to exaggerate. They'll fall out of neutral and there'll be a really big arch in their low back, and we don't want that to happen. So Moira Stott decided to utilize the obliques a little bit, and if that person who didn't have the strongest abdominal muscles in the world was going to lose their neutral position, they would be asked to imprint. Imprint was never to push the low back into the floor. Imprint was to bring the ribs a little bit closer to the hips to engage the oblique, so that when the second leg lifts, the person either falls into neutral or stays in imprint. The problem with this was that the term imprint is not neutral. It is where the hips and the ribs are a little bit closer together. The low back is not jammed into the floor, but it's closer to the floor. This was only ever meant to be an interim position, because the best way to train a decent core and to train a healthy core is to start in neutral. So Imprint was only ever meant to be an interim position until that person who, remember, Joseph Pilates, when you went to his classes, you saw him one-to-one twice a week for 3 months. So he was there making sure that you progressed. So if Imprint was an interim position, eventually the abdominal muscles would get strong enough for that person to train in neutral. That was the hope. Because of the way we structure our classes, because we have people coming in and going out, because people don't stay with you for courses anymore, they're staying in Imprint, and it was never the point. The point was always to bring the person into neutral. Should you teach Imprint in a general class? Absolutely not. The term imprint your spine, the term move your pelvis into an imprinted or posterior pelvic tilt is not a good one for every single person in the room. However, if you notice somebody, they might have just had a baby, and just had a baby might be 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, sometimes years, and their abdominal wall is just not strong enough. They might not have had a baby, their abdominal wall might just not be strong enough. If, only if, you see this happening as the person lifts the second leg, go over to them and whisper to them, why don't you just move your ribs and your hips a little bit closer together, engage your oblique, and then lift the second leg. A note here. Your core is your pelvic floor, your transversus abdominis, and your thoracic diaphragm. And this is sufficient stabilization for about the weight of one leg. It is not sufficient stabilization ever for 2 legs. You have to add the powerhouse, which is the obliques, and I would add the serratus. So that as the second leg lifts, there's an extra layer of stabilization to maintain neutral and maintain stability. Imprint is used only for individuals who lose their stability lifting the second leg and lose their stability in an anterior pelvic tilt position. We tell them gently drop your low back a little bit closer to the floor. Never jam the low back in. And it is only until that person over weeks or months finds the abdominal stability, finds the oblique connection to add to neutral. Lastly, yogis. In my experience of teaching yogis, the reason why they need Imprint is actually to do with their shoulders. Your scapula live on a rib cage. So your scapula live on your rib cage. Your ribs are curved. And because we are eliciting a relaxation response in yoga, when yogis lie down on the floor, they tend to flatten the scapula onto the floor. So the scapula are no longer on a cage, they're on a flat surface, which is the floor. This causes a little bit of flaring of the ribs. But more importantly, it causes the serratus to be a little bit over lengthened. So the job of your serratus is to pull your scapula forwards and down and to link into your opposite oblique and all the way down your leg and up your back, but this is the fascial connection into the opposite hip. So if you, yogis, keep your scapula flat on the floor, your serratus isn't working, your ribs are flaring. Your nervous system knows that there is a huge arch in your back, so you will tend to push your low back into the floor to lift the second leg, when actually what you need is to use your serratus and pull your shoulder blade onto your rib cage so that your bottom rib is on the floor, and that way everything stays still and stable as you load it. So let me show you that again. So if I let my scapula completely flatten onto the floor, I have no serratus engagement. My ribs are flaring, which means that my ribs are off the floor at the back. As I lift the leg, I'm going to feel totally vulnerable in my low back. So the best thing I can do is to push my low back into the floor, but this isn't helping the problem, when the problem is that the serratus, which pulls the scapula onto the rib cage,